The ink on the will wasn't even dry yet. My sister, Brittany, stood at the top of the stairs of the gleaming Gulfstream, popping a bottle of champagne. The cork hit the concrete floor right next to my inheritance. A rusted, tarp-covered heap that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. I looked at Tyler, my boyfriend of 3 years. He didn't even slow down. He hoisted his designer bag onto his shoulder and walked right past me toward the jet. "Sorry, Ash," he said, keeping his eyes fixed on the luxury leather seats inside. "You can't fly first class with a pile of scrap metal." The turbine engines roared to life, blasting hot dust into my face as I watched them leave me behind in the dark. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. Also, have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Let me know. I didn't scream. I didn't chase the runway lights like some heartbroken character in a bad movie. I just stood there until the roar of the engines faded into a low hum, and then, finally, into silence. The dust settled on my boots. My eyes were dry. In fact, my vision had never been clearer. Tyler had walked up those stairs with a designer bag I paid for, wearing shoes I bought, holding a ticket I effectively subsidized. He thought he was walking into a new life. He didn't realize he was walking out of his safety net. I pulled out my phone. The screen was the only light in the cavernous, empty hangar. My fingers moved automatically, executing a sequence I should have done years ago. I opened my banking app, the joint checking account we used for household expenses, which usually meant his gaming habits was the first target. Frozen. The platinum card Tyler kept in his wallet for emergencies, canceled. The lease on the apartment he claimed was ours, but was signed entirely in my name? I drafted the notice to vacate right there, standing in the dark. It took exactly 4 minutes to dismantle the financial support system I had built for him. I didn't feel sad. I felt like I was finally closing a tab on a bad investment. Then I turned to my inheritance. The tarp was heavy, stiff with age, and smelling of mildew and old secrets. I yanked it back. Underneath sat the shell of the 1967 Mustang. To anyone else, it was a disaster. Rust ate at the wheel wells like a disease. The paint was non-existent, just patches of primer and bare metal. The interior was gutted. It looked like a corpse. But I wasn't anyone else. I was a mechanic. I backed my truck up to the hangar doors. The winch cable hissed as I pulled it out, the steel cold against my palms. I didn't look at the empty spot where the jet used to be. I crawled underneath the Mustang's chassis. The concrete floor was freezing, biting through my coveralls. I smelled oil, old rubber, and decay. This was my world. Not sky lounges and champagne, but gears, leverage, and grease. I hooked the axle, double-checked the chains, and locked the winch gears. With a mechanical groan, the rusted car began to move, inching up the ramp of my flatbed trailer. I secured the wheels, tightening the straps until my knuckles turned white. No hesitation, just muscle memory. I drove out of the private airfield without looking in the rearview mirror. At the main gate, I hopped out one last time. I snapped the heavy padlock shut, sealing the grounds. The brass key felt heavy in my hand. I looked at it for a second, thinking about the summers I spent here with Grandpa Arthur, before Brittany turned it into her personal photo shoot location. I threw the key into the tall grass. Let them find a locksmith when they come back. If they come back, the drive home was quiet. My apartment, my real apartment, not the fantasy life Brittany and Tyler were chasing, was dark when I walked in. It didn't smell like expensive perfume. It smelled of engine grease, fast orange hand cleaner, and solitude. I sat on the edge of my bed, my boots still on. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Tyler, probably asking why his card was declined at the duty-free shop. Or maybe a photo from the jet captioned with a mocking emoji. I didn't even look. I turned the phone face down on the wood. I had a card to strip. And for the first time in 3 years, the silence in the room didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. For the next 14 days, I didn't see the sun. I lived inside the garage, surrounded by the smell of solvent and rust dust. My hands were permanently stained black, the grease settling into my fingerprints like a tattoo. To Brittany, this kind of work was a punishment. To me, it was the only language that made sense. As I dismantled the Mustang piece by piece, I dismantled the last 10 years of my life in my head. The narrative Brittany sold to the family was that I was the unlucky one, the one who stayed behind. The truth was, I was the one keeping the lights on. While Brittany was finding herself in Paris and Milan on Grandpa Arthur's credit card, I was in this shop, learning the difference between an intake manifold and a carburetor. I managed the inventory. I balanced the books. When Arthur's hand started to shake too much to hold a wrench, mine became his. Brittany viewed Grandpa as a limitless ATM. I viewed him as a partner. She showed up for the payouts. I showed up for the payroll. I was lying on my back in the driver's footwell, removing the rotted dashboard liner, when my screwdriver hit something that didn't sound like metal. It was a soft thud. I reached up behind the glove box assembly. Taped to the firewall, hidden where no casual mechanic would ever look, was a thick manila envelope. It wasn't dusty. It had been placed there recently. I crawled out of the car and wiped my hands on a rag before opening it. It was Grandpa Arthur's handwriting. The letters were shaky, written in the final weeks before he passed. Ashley, the letter began. If you are reading this, you didn't sell the car for scrap. You did what you always do. You rolled up your sleeves and got to work. I sat down on the cold concrete. You are probably angry about the jet, he wrote. You are wondering why I gave your sister a $24 million aircraft and gave you a rusted heap. You think I was blind to her greed. I wasn't. I gave Brittany the jet because I knew exactly who she was. She needs to be seen. She needs the shiny object. But planes, Ashley, are not assets. They are liabilities. They are hungry beasts that eat cash. I gave her the jet as a final test, knowing she likely wouldn't pass it. I stared at the words. The inheritance wasn't a gift for Brittany. It was a burden disguised as a blessing. I gave you the rust, the letter continued, because I knew you had the vision to see what it could become. You have the patience to build value, not just consume it. This car isn't just a car. Look at the chassis number. And remember, cutting off a rotten limb isn't cruelty. It is how you save the tree. I lowered the letter. For years, I had carried a low-level hum of guilt, the feeling that I should have done more to help my sister, that I should have been more supportive of her dreams. Reading those words, that guilt vanished. It didn't fade. It was deleted. Grandpa hadn't left me behind. He had unleashed me. He had handed me a test of character, and without knowing it, I had already passed. I looked at the rusted shell of the Mustang. It wasn't garbage anymore. It was the only honest thing in this entire family. I picked up my wrench. I had work to do. Winter settled into the bones of the garage. For weeks, my world shrank down to the 3 feet of concrete surrounding the Mustang. My knuckles were perpetually skinned, wrapping tape around split cuticles just to keep working. The restoration was brutal. It wasn't the romantic montage you see on television. It was hours of grinding rust until my ears rang, inhaling dust that tasted like iron, and wrestling with bolts that hadn't moved since 1967. But while I was fighting with metal on the ground, my sister was living her best life in the stratosphere. My phone became a window into a world I was supposed to envy. Every time I took a break to drink lukewarm coffee, the screen lit up with another notification. Brittany wasn't just enjoying the inheritance, she was broadcasting it. She needed an audience to make the money feel real. I saw a video of her popping another bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, the clouds visible through the oval window behind her. She panned the camera to Tyler, who was wearing a new Rolex that looked too big for his wrist. Then she zoomed in on her own face, laughing. The caption read, "Some of us were born to touch the sky. Others were born to play in the dirt. Number sorry, not sorry, number jet life." She tagged me. Of course she did. She didn't want me to just know she was winning. She wanted the world to know I was losing. I scrolled past the comments. "Queen, living the dream. Your sister is just jealous." They saw a successful heiress. I saw a girl burning through jet fuel at $5,000 an hour to impress strangers on the internet. Then came the text from Tyler. It popped up at 2 in the morning. I was under the car, welding a patch on the floor pan. I slid out on the creeper, lifting my welding mask. Yo, the text read, "I left my gaming console at the apartment. Ship it to the hotel in Monaco. Address is below. And pack it properly this time. I know you're bitter, but don't scratch my stuff." I stared at the glowing blue letters. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I was okay after he walked out on me. He treated me like his shipping clerk. In his mind, the dynamic hadn't changed. I was still the invisible support staff, the one who handled the logistics while he played the main character. Replying wasn't worth the calories. Neither was anger. Rage is an energy leak. And I needed every ounce of mine for the car. I stood up and walked over to the corner of the garage where I had piled the boxes of his things I had packed up weeks ago. I found the box with the console. It was taped shut, labeled with his name. I didn't ship it. I didn't destroy it. I simply moved it to the very back of the storage shelf, behind a stack of old tires. He could wait. I looked back at the car. It was stripped down to its skeleton. It looked ugly, vulnerable, and worthless. But under the shop lights, the raw steel gleamed with potential. Brittany and Tyler were loud. They were shiny. They were screaming for attention from 30,000 feet. But down here, in the silence of the garage, I was building something real. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb. I pulled my welding mask back down. The world went dark, and then, with a spark, I lit up my own future. It happened on a Tuesday. At 3 in the morning, I was working on the front inner apron, scrubbing away 50 years of hardened grease and road grime with a wire brush. My arms ached. The garage was freezing. I was just trying to expose the vehicle identification number to verify the production year for a parts order. I expected to see a standard factory code. I wiped the metal clean with a rag soaked in solvent. I blinked. Then I wiped it again. The stamp didn't look right. It didn't have the standard sequence of a 1967 production model. The letters were hand-stamped, uneven, and deep. SHELBYEXP001. I stopped breathing. In the vintage car world, there are rumors, and then there are ghosts. EXP stood for experimental. 001 meant the first. This wasn't just a Mustang. This was the lost prototype Shelby Little Red, a car that history books said was crushed and destroyed decades ago. I didn't take a photo. I didn't post a teaser on Instagram. I walked to the heavy steel doors of the garage, locked all 3 deadbolts, and pulled the blinds. Then I called Mr. Henderson. Henderson was Grandpa Arthur's attorney and a specialist in high-value asset appraisal. He arrived at dawn, looking out of place in his Italian suit among the oil stains. He spent 2 hours inspecting the chassis, measuring weld points, and checking the stamping against archival records he brought in a briefcase. Finally, he took off his reading glasses and looked at me. "Ashley," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "do not restore this car with aftermarket parts. Do not drive it. This is the Holy Grail. As it sits in this condition, it is worth $35 million, fully restored to concourse quality, you are looking at 50. The number hung in the air like smoke. $50 million, more than double what Brittany received. I leaned against the workbench, feeling the cold steel press into my lower back. Grandpa knew, I whispered. He knew it wasn't scrap. Arthur knew exactly what he was doing, Henderson said, opening a file folder. Which brings me to your sister. He laid a spreadsheet on the oily workbench. It was a breakdown of the estate's distribution. I need you to understand why your grandfather structured the will this way, Henderson said. The world sees Brittany flying on a $24 million jet and thinks she is wealthy. She isn't. That jet is a liability disguised as an asset. He pointed to a column of red numbers. The jet requires $200,000 a month in hangar fees, crew salaries, insurance, and fuel. The cash inheritance Brittany received, it is legally bound to a trust that can only be used for the jet's operation and maintenance. She can't spend it on herself. She has to spend it to keep the plane flying. Essentially, she isn't the owner of that jet. She is its employee. She is working for the machine. I looked at the numbers. It was a financial death spiral. Grandpa Arthur had handed Brittany a golden anchor and watched her tie it around her own ankle. She's burning cash to maintain an image, Henderson continued. Every time she flies, the asset depreciates. Every day this car sits here, it appreciates. She is trapped in a liability loop. You, Ashley, are holding pure equity. I picked up the pen. Henderson had already prepared the paperwork to transfer the car's title into an anonymous limited liability company. Does she know? I asked. She will, Henderson replied. When the cash runs out, I signed the documents. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. Brittany was posting selfies from 30,000 feet, thinking she was looking down on me. In reality, she was falling. She just hadn't hit the ground yet. 6 months. That is exactly how long it takes for a $24 million inheritance to turn into a suffocating mountain of debt when you treat a private jet like an Uber. The social media posts had stopped. The champagne toast had dried up. Mr. Henderson kept me updated on the forensic accounting of Brittany's downfall. It was brutal math. The cash for operations trust had been drained. The maintenance bills were 60 days past due. The crew had walked off the job in Miami, leaving the Gulfstream grounded on the tarmac, accruing parking fees of $2,000 a day. Brittany was insolvent. She was sitting in a dark hotel room, likely staring at a phone that no longer rang with offers for parties, but with demands from creditors. She was drowning. And like a drowning person, she flailed for anything that looked like a raft. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the notification came through. It wasn't a text from my sister. It was an automated security alert from the asset protection software Mr. Henderson had installed for the LLC. Unauthorized listing detected VIN match. I opened the laptop on my workbench. My heart rate didn't spike. I felt a strange, icy calm. I clicked the link. There it was. A listing on a second-tier online auction site. 1967 Ford Mustang. Barn find. Project car. Needs work but solid. $15,000. She used old photos. Photos she must have taken on her phone years ago when Grandpa first bought it, before the rust had fully taken over. I scrolled down to the attached documents section. To list the car, you need proof of ownership. I clicked on the title transfer PDF. The document was a clumsy, desperate forgery. The date was backdated to the day of the funeral. And at the bottom, in shaky blue ink, was my signature. I stared at the screen. She hadn't just tried to sell a car she didn't own. She had forged a legal document to transfer a titled asset across state lines. She thought she was stealing a beat-up Ford to pay a fuel bill. She had no idea she was attempting to fence a $35 million historical artifact. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This wasn't a civil matter. By signing my name, Brittany had crossed the line into wire fraud and grand larceny. I picked up the phone. Henderson was on speed dial. She listed it, I said. "I see it," Henderson replied, his voice crisp. "I am looking at the transfer document now. The signature is a clear forgery. Ashley, I need you to understand what happens next. If we file this, there is no going back. This is a felony." I looked at the gleaming silver body of the Shelby Little Red sitting in my garage. It was perfect. It was honest. It had survived decades of neglect to finally shine. Brittany had been given everything: wealth, status, the easy path, and she had destroyed it all in half a year. Now, she wanted to destroy my work too. She made her choice, I said. "File it?" I hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I felt like a judge who had just heard the final piece of evidence. The verdict was in. The auction house in Monterey smelled of old money, leather, and quiet power. In the center of the rotating podium sat the Shelby Little Red. It no longer looked like a rust bucket. It was a masterpiece of restored engineering, gleaming in cardinal red, its chrome reflecting the faces of billionaires holding numbered paddles. The bidding had already passed $20 million. I stood in the wings, wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than the truck I used to tow the car home. Mr. Henderson stood beside me, checking his watch. "They are here," he said softly. I turned toward the velvet ropes at the entrance. There was a commotion. Security guards were trying to block two people, but Brittany's screeching voice cut through the polite murmur of the room. "That is my family's property. Get your hands off me. I need to speak to my sister." Brittany and Tyler burst into the main hall. The visual contrast was brutal. Brittany, who used to look like a walking magazine cover, looked unraveled. Her hair was messy, her designer coat was wrinkled, and there was a desperation in her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. Tyler trailed behind her, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. They spotted me and sprinted across the floor, ignoring the gasps of the attendees. "Ashley!" Brittany panted, grabbing my arm. Her grip was clammy. "Stop the auction! You can't sell it! That car belonged to Grandpa Arthur. It's family property. We have to split the proceeds. We're sisters. Ash, you can't cut me out." Tyler stepped up, putting on his best smile, though his eyes darted nervously around the room. "Babe, look, we messed up. The jet, it's complicated, but we can fix this. We're a team, right? 30 million split 3 ways is plenty for everyone." I looked at Tyler. Then I looked at Brittany. I didn't pull my arm away. I didn't yell. I just signaled Mr. Henderson. He stepped forward and placed a thick manila folder into my hand. "There is nothing to split," I said, my voice calm enough to freeze water. Brittany's eyes widened. "Don't be greedy, Ashley. Mom and Dad aren't here," I interrupted. "And neither is the title to this car. It belongs to the LLC." I handed her the folder. She opened it, her hands shaking. "What is this?" she whispered. "That," I said, pointing to the top document, "is a copy of the federal lawsuit filed this morning for wire fraud, forgery, and attempted grand larceny regarding your fraudulent auction listing. And the second document is a restraining order." Tyler backed away, his smile vanishing. "Fraud? Whoa, Ashley, I didn't sign anything. That was all her." Brittany looked at him, betrayed, then back at me. Tears began to well up, not tears of sorrow, but tears of terror. "Ashley, please, they'll put me in jail. I'm broke. The jet is impounded. I have nothing." I leaned in close, so only she could hear me. "You wanted to fly, Brittany," I said. "Now you crash." I nodded to the security team. 2 large men in dark suits stepped in, gripping Brittany and Tyler by the elbows. As they were dragged backward toward the exit, screaming and pleading, the auctioneer's gavel slammed down on the podium with a sound like a gunshot. Sold! The auctioneer boomed. For $35 million. The room erupted in applause. I didn't look at the door. I looked at the car. The rust was gone, and so was the rot in my family tree. The legal cleanup took 3 months. It was quieter than the auction. There were no cameras when the judge sentenced Brittany to 5 years of probation and ordered full restitution for the defrauded auction fees. Since she had 0 assets left, the jet having been repossessed by the bank to cover the outstanding hangar liens, she was assigned court-mandated community service. The last I heard, she was picking up trash along the highway wearing an orange vest that clashed horribly with the remnants of her old life. As for Tyler, he vanished. I blocked his number, his email, and his social media. I didn't need to know where he went. He was a bad investment. I had finally written off the books. $35 million is a lot of money. It is the kind of money that ruins people who aren't ready for it. But Grandpa Arthur hadn't just left me a car. He had left me a curriculum. He had taught me that wealth isn't what you spend, it is what you build. I didn't buy a penthouse. I didn't buy a yacht. I bought the hangar. I hired a crew to clear out the weeds and repaint the steel beams. I installed state-of-the-art lifts and climate control. Above the main bay doors, I hung a simple sign: the Arthur Vintage Restoration Academy. I wasn't just fixing cars anymore. I was fixing the industry. I set up a scholarship fund for kids who, like me, preferred grease to glitter, kids who knew how to work with their hands, but just needed a chance to get their foot in the door. Today, the shop is full. The air smells of welding, ozone, and fresh coffee. I have 10 students restoring a fleet of 1950s trucks. I walk the floor not as an invisible employee, but as the owner. The noise here isn't chaotic, it is the symphony of productivity. I still drive my old truck. It has 200,000 miles on it, and the transmission sticks in second gear sometimes. But I love it. It gets me where I need to go. Sometimes, when the shop is quiet at night, I think about the choice Grandpa gave us. Brittany chose the thing that shines for 3 seconds. She wanted the flash, the instant gratification, the view from 30,000 feet. I chose the thing that looks like rust but lasts for 3 generations. I chose the work. Value isn't what you show off on Instagram. It isn't the champagne or the private jet. True value is what you build when no one is watching. It is the patience to sand down the rough edges until you find the silver underneath. Brittany wanted to fly, I wanted to drive. And the funny thing about driving is that you actually get to see the world you are passing through. You get to feel the road. And most importantly, you are the one holding the wheel. If you believe hard work eventually pays off, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have chosen the jet or the car? I will be reading your answers.